In the scorching summer of 1934, as the Great Depression ravaged the American Southwest and monstrous dust storms swallowed entire towns, Catherine Kate Brennan stood alone in her weathered trading post on the edge of the Navajo Nation. The sky had turned an ominous black-orange, and the wind howled like a wounded animal across the high desert. She never expected to find anyone alive in the approaching wall of dust and debris that stretched from earth to heaven. But there, wrapped in a tattered Navajo blanket and barely breathing beneath a collapsed wagon, were two Navajo infants, twins whose eyes held the depth of ancient wisdom despite their tender age. Kate's decision to shelter them would set in motion a chain of events that would bring 200 Navajo warriors to her doorstep, not for war, but to bestow upon her an honor no white woman had ever received in the history of their people. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The heat was suffocating that July morning in 1934. Even at dawn, Catherine Kate Brennan wiped sweat from her brow as she stepped outside her trading post, a sturdy adobe building that had served as a bridge between the white and Navajo worlds. For nearly 2 decades, at 35, Kate had the weathered hands of someone who had learned to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. But her green eyes still held the curiosity and compassion that had first brought her to this remote corner of Arizona. 20 years earlier, the trading post sat at the intersection of 2 worlds, literally. To the west stretched the vast expanse of the Navajo Nation, where red sandstone mesas rose like ancient cathedrals against an endless sky. To the east lay the small settlement of Redemption Falls, a struggling mining town of fewer than 300 souls, most of whom viewed their Navajo neighbors with a mixture of suspicion and outright hostility. Kate's post served as neutral ground, one of the few places where Navajo families could trade wool, silver jewelry, and hand-woven rugs for essential supplies like flour, coffee, and medical supplies. Kate had inherited the trading post from her Uncle Jeremiah Brennan, a gruff Irish immigrant who had established the business in 1889 with nothing but stubbornness and a genuine respect for Navajo craftsmanship. When consumption finally claimed Jeremiah in 1914, 20-year-old Kate had shocked everyone by refusing to sell the property and return to civilization. Instead, she had learned to speak fluent Navajo, mastered the intricate art of fair trading, and earned something far more valuable than money, the trust of the Diné people, as the Navajo called themselves. But trust was a fragile commodity in 1934. The Great Depression had hit the Southwest like a sledgehammer, and desperation made people cruel. White ranchers blamed the Navajo for overgrazing that contributed to the dust storms. Government officials pushed for stock reduction programs that would force Navajo families to slaughter their sheep and horses, animals that represented not just livelihood but spiritual connection to their ancestors. Meanwhile, the Bureau of Indian Affairs continued its relentless campaign to assimilate native children by forcing them into distant boarding schools where speaking Navajo was forbidden and traditional ways were systematically destroyed. Kate had witnessed families torn apart by these policies. She had seen proud warriors reduced to begging for government rations. She had watched children return from boarding schools unable to communicate with their own grandparents, caught between 2 worlds and belonging fully to neither. The weight of these tragedies had carved lines around her eyes and streaks of premature grey through her auburn hair. That morning, as Kate checked her barometer and studied the southwestern horizon, she felt the familiar prickle of unease that preceded the massive dust storms that had become increasingly common. The drought had lasted 3 years now, turning fertile grazing land into a moonscape of cracked earth and dead vegetation. When the winds came, they lifted millions of tons of topsoil into towering walls of destruction that could bury entire homesteads and kill anyone caught in the open. The weather signs were unmistakable, a peculiar stillness in the air, the way the distant mesas seemed to shimmer and blur, and most ominously, the complete absence of birdsong. Even the hardy desert birds knew to seek shelter when a big duster was coming. Kate retreated inside her trading post to secure everything she could. The building itself was solid, thick adobe walls that had weathered countless storms, reinforced, wooden shutters, and a well-stocked cellar where she could wait out the worst weather. She moved her most valuable trade goods away from the windows, filled every available container with water from her well, and checked her emergency supplies of food and kerosene. As she worked, Kate's mind drifted to the Navajo families who lived in traditional hogans scattered across the surrounding desert. Many of these dwellings, built of wood and mud, offered little protection against the massive dust storms. She had seen entire families arrive at her trading post after a duster, their faces black with dirt, their children coughing up mud for days afterward. By noon, the western sky had taken on the color of dried blood. The temperature had dropped, nearly 20 degrees in an hour, a sure sign that the storm was massive and moving fast. Kate could feel the electricity in the air, making her skin tingle and her hair stand on end. In the distance, she could see the dark wall approaching, stretching from the southern horizon to the northern limits of her vision. It was one of the biggest dusters she had ever witnessed. Kate was securing the last of her shutters when she heard something that made her blood run cold, the sound of a horse screaming in terror. She peered through a gap in the wooden slats and saw a sight that would haunt her forever. About 200 yards from her trading post, a Navajo wagon had overturned, probably when the horse panicked at the approaching storm. The animal was down, thrashing in its traces, clearly injured. But more horrifying was the realization that someone might be trapped beneath the overturned wagon. Every survival instinct told Kate to stay inside. The dust storm was less than 10 minutes away, and anyone caught in the open when it hit would be lucky to survive. The combination of hurricane force, winds and abrasive dust could strip skin from bone and fill lungs with enough dirt to cause suffocation. But the possibility that someone was injured and helpless overrode her self-preservation. Kate grabbed her emergency kit, rope, medical supplies, water, and a long scarf to cover her nose and mouth, and plunged into the pre-storm chaos. The wind was already fierce enough to stagger her, and dust devils spun across the desert floor like malevolent spirits. She fought her way toward the overturned wagon, squinting against the stinging sand that peppered her face. When she reached the wreckage, Kate's heart nearly stopped. The horse was indeed badly injured, its leg broken and eyes rolling white with pain and terror. But trapped beneath the wagon's canvas cover, she could hear something that defied belief, the weak crying of infants. Kate threw herself down beside the overturned wagon and began tearing at the heavy canvas. The crying grew louder, and she realized there were two distinct voices, twins by the sound of it. She managed to create an opening and peered inside to see two Navajo babies, perhaps 6 months old, wrapped together in a traditional cradleboard that had protected them when the wagon overturned. The children appeared uninjured but terrified and dehydrated. Their dark eyes, huge in their small faces, looked up at Kate with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. She had perhaps 5 minutes before the full fury of the dust storm hit, and the babies were too small and weak to survive the journey back to her trading post without protection. Kate made a decision that would change everything. She crawled partially under the overturned wagon, creating a protective barrier with her own body, and gathered both babies against her chest. The cradleboard, a masterpiece of Navajo craftsmanship, had a built-in canopy that she pulled over their faces to protect them from the dust. Then she began the most harrowing journey of her life. a 200-yard crawl across open desert while hurricane-force winds tried to rip her apart. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. The dust storm hit with the force of a freight train when Kate was still 50 yards from her trading post. Visibility dropped to 0 in seconds. The wind was so strong, it lifted her to her feet and slammed her back down repeatedly. Sand and grit blasted her exposed skin like buckshot, and the noise was indescribable. A roaring, howling, grinding sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. Kate crawled forward by feel, one hand protecting the babies while the other groped for familiar landmarks. She could taste blood in her mouth from breathing the abrasive dust despite her scarf. Her knees were being torn apart by the rocky ground, and several times the wind rolled her sideways, forcing her to curl around the babies to protect them from impact. When her fingers finally touched the stone steps of her trading post, Kate almost cried with relief. She managed to get the door open and tumble inside just as the storm reached its full intensity. The building shook like it was being beaten with giant hammers, and dust poured through every crack and crevice despite her preparations. Kate collapsed on her wooden floor, still clutching the two babies. Both children were covered with dust, but breathing steadily. As she cleaned their faces with water from her emergency supply, she got her first clear look at them. They were beautiful children. A boy and a girl with the distinctive features of the Dene people and eyes that seemed far too wise for their age. The boy was slightly larger and had a small birthmark on his left temple shaped like a crescent moon. The girl was more delicate, but seemed to have a fiercer temperament, crying louder when Kate tried to clean the dust from her hair. Both children wore traditional clothing. Tiny moccasins, cotton shirts dyed with natural pigments, and silver bracelets that indicated their family had some wealth and status within the Navajo community. As the dust storm raged outside, Kate fed the babies small amounts of water and examined them for injuries. They appeared to be in good health despite their ordeal, but they were clearly traumatized and kept reaching for each other whenever Kate tried to separate them for cleaning. She realized they had probably never been apart in their short lives. The storm continued for 6 hours, one of the longest and most violent dusters Kate had ever experienced. During that time, she cared for the twins in the dim light of kerosene lamps, singing Irish lullabies her mother had taught her, and marveling at how quickly the children seemed to accept her presence. By evening, when the winds finally began to subside, both babies were sleeping peacefully in a makeshift crib Kate had constructed from trading blankets. When dawn broke the next morning, Kate surveyed the devastation outside her trading post. The landscape had been completely transformed. Familiar landmarks buried under drifts of sand and debris, the overturned wagon now just a barely visible mound in the distance. The injured horse was dead, suffocated by the dust. Most troubling of all, there was no sign of the baby's parents or any other survivors. Kate realized she faced an impossible situation. These children had obviously been traveling with family when the storm hit, but the parents were nowhere to be found. They might have been thrown clear when the wagon overturned and taken shelter elsewhere, or they might have perished in the storm. Without knowing their identity or clan affiliation, Kate couldn't simply return them to the Navajo community. Such an action could actually cause more problems if she delivered them to the wrong family or the wrong area. Moreover, the twins would need immediate care that might not be available in the scattered Navajo settlements. They needed regular feeding, medical attention, and protection from the ongoing effects of dust exposure. Kate's trading post was better equipped than most homes in the region, with reliable water, medical supplies, and communication equipment. As Kate fed the babies that morning, using a mixture of canned milk and water that she hoped would be suitable for infants, she made a decision that surprised even herself. She would care for these children until she could locate their family, no matter how long that took. Something about their presence filled a void in her life that she hadn't even realized existed. The twins seemed to sense her commitment. The boy, whom Kate had started calling Little Moon because of his birthmark, would grip her finger with surprising strength and make soft cooing sounds when she spoke to him. The girl, more spirited and vocal, had claimed Kate's attention through pure force of personality. Kate found herself calling her Desert Rose, not just for her beauty, but for her thorny determination to make her needs known. But Kate also understood the magnitude of what she was undertaking. In 1934, a white woman caring for Native American children was not just unusual, it was potentially explosive. The Bureau of Indian Affairs had strict policies about the placement of native children, and local white communities were increasingly hostile toward anything that might be perceived as mixing between races. If word spread that she was harboring Navajo babies, she could face legal challenges, social ostracism, or worse. Yet, as Kate looked down at the sleeping twins, she felt a certainty she hadn't experienced since her uncle's death. These children had come to her for a reason, delivered by the storm that should have killed them. She would protect them with her life if necessary, and somehow she would find a way to reunite them with their people when the time was right. What Kate didn't know was that the twins' disappearance had already been discovered, and their father was beginning a search that would span months and involve the most respected warriors and trackers of the Navajo Nation. The children she had saved were not ordinary babies. They were the son and daughter of Joseph Crow Feather, one of the most influential medicine men and leaders among the Diné people. And when he finally found them, he would bring with him an honor guard of 200 warriors to express his gratitude in a way that would forever change how both communities viewed each other. The dust storm had delivered more than just 2 babies to Kate Brennan's doorstep. It had brought her a destiny she never could have imagined, and set in motion events that would test every belief she held about family, loyalty, and the courage required to do what was right in a world determined to keep people divided by the color of their skin and the accident of their birth. 3 weeks had passed since the dust storm delivered Little Moon and Desert Rose to Kate Brennan's doorstep, and the twins had transformed her solitary existence into something she barely recognized. The trading post, once a place of quiet contemplation and methodical business, now echoed with baby laughter, crying, and the constant rustle of makeshift diapers fashioned from flour sacks and old cotton fabric. Kate had discovered that caring for twin infants was like trying to conduct an orchestra where half the musicians played different songs simultaneously. When Little Moon slept peacefully, Desert Rose would invariably wake up demanding attention with the lung capacity of a seasoned opera singer. When Desert Rose finally settled into contentment, Little Moon would decide it was time for feeding, playing, or simply confirming that Kate was still within reach of his tiny, surprisingly strong fingers. The physical demands were exhausting, but Kate found herself energized in ways she hadn't experienced since her uncle's death. Every small milestone, Little Moon's first genuine smile, Desert Rose's determined attempts to roll over, the way both babies would calm instantly when she sang Irish ballads, filled her with a fierce protective joy that surprised her with its intensity. But the emotional rewards came with escalating dangers that Kate was only beginning to understand. The first warning arrived on a sweltering Tuesday morning in the form of Deputy Marshal Frank Hartwell, a lean, suspicious man who served as the primary law enforcement officer for the scattered communities surrounding the Navajo Nation. Hartwell rode up to the trading post with the deliberate slowness of someone who wanted his presence to be noted and feared. He was known throughout the territory as a man who viewed Native Americans as inherent problems, requiring constant surveillance and control. His arrival at Kate's isolated outpost could only mean trouble. Kate quickly moved the twins to the back room of the trading post, where she had constructed a more permanent nursery, using wooden crates, soft blankets, and toys carved from scraps of wood during the long evening hours. Both babies had grown noticeably in their 3 weeks with her. Their cheeks had filled out, their eyes had grown brighter and more alert, and they had developed distinct personalities that never failed to amuse her. "Miss Brennan," Hartwell said as he dismounted, his voice carrying the artificial politeness that barely concealed his underlying hostility. "Heard you had some excitement during the big duster a few weeks back." Kate stepped outside to meet him, closing the trading post, door firmly behind her. "Nothing I couldn't handle, Deputy. The building held up fine, and I didn't lose much inventory." Hartwell's pale eyes scanned the trading post exterior with practiced suspicion. "That's not exactly what I heard. Got reports from some of the miners. Heading back from Redemption Falls, they saw wagon wreckage near your place after the storm. Found a dead horse. Looked like it might have been Indian." Kate's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced her expression to remain neutral. "Lot of debris after a storm that size. Could have been anything. Wagon parts blown in from miles away." "Could have been," Hartwell agreed slowly, "but it got me thinking about something else. See, there's been some strange reports coming out of the Navajo settlements. Families asking around about missing folks, specifically a family that might have been traveling during the storm." The deputy's words hit Kate like a physical blow. Someone was looking for the twins, probably their parents or extended family. She should have felt relief that the children's people were searching for them, but instead she felt a complex mixture of hope and dread. Relief that the babies hadn't been abandoned, but terror that they might be taken away before she was ready. "To let them go. I wouldn't know anything about that," Kate said carefully. "If there were survivors from any accident, they would have come to me for help. It's what people do out here." Hartwell stepped closer, close enough that Kate could smell the tobacco and whiskey on his breath. "Here's the thing, Miss Brennan. The Bureau of Indian Affairs has been cracking down on unauthorized contact between white civilians and tribal members. There's been too much trouble lately. Disputes over grazing rights, complaints about traders cheating the Indians, problems with mixed-blood children who don't fit into either world." He paused to let his words sink in. "Point is, if someone was harboring Indian children without proper authorization, that would be a serious federal offense. Could mean prison time, loss of trading licenses, complete investigation of all business dealings with the tribe." Kate felt her temper flare at the implied threat, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I've been trading with the Navajo for 15 years, Deputy. My relationships with tribal members are built on honesty and mutual respect. I don't need lessons about proper conduct." "Maybe not," Hartwell said with a cold smile, "but you might need reminders about the consequences of improper conduct. The federal government is taking a much harder line these days. Unauthorized adoption of Indian children, even temporarily, is considered kidnapping under federal law." The word kidnapping hit Kate like a slap. She realized that from the outside, her rescue of the twins could indeed be interpreted as theft, especially if she couldn't prove the children had been abandoned or if their family wanted them returned. "Immediately. I'll keep that in mind," Kate said evenly. "Is there anything else you needed, Deputy?" Hartwell took one more long look around the trading post, his gaze lingering on the windows as if he could see through the adobe walls to the secrets hidden inside. "Just remember what I said, Miss Brennan. The territory is changing, and people who don't change with it tend to get left behind, or worse." After the deputy rode away, Kate retreated inside to find both twins awake and fussing, as if they had sensed the tension in the air. She picked up Desert Rose, who immediately calmed against her shoulder, while Little Moon watched her with those unnervingly intelligent dark eyes that seemed to understand far more than any 6-month-old should. Kate realized she was facing an impossible dilemma. If the twins' family was actively searching for them, the ethical thing to do would be to make contact and arrange their return. but doing so would expose her to potential federal prosecution for unauthorized custody of Native American children. Moreover, she had no way of knowing whether the family searching for the twins was actually their blood relatives, or whether returning them would put them in danger. The situation became even more complicated the following week when Kate received an unexpected visitor who would forever change her understanding of the children she was protecting. She was feeding the twins their morning meal, a mixture of goat's milk, honey, and crushed corn that seemed to agree with their digestive systems, when she heard the distinctive sound of multiple horses approaching at a deliberate pace. Kate peered through her window to see 3 Navajo men dismounting near her trading post. The leader was an elderly man with long grey hair braided with silver ornaments and wearing traditional clothing that indicated high status within the tribe. Behind him were 2 younger men, probably warriors or hunters based on their weapons and the way they carried themselves. Kate's first instinct was panic. Had they come for the twins? Were they angry about her unauthorized care of Navajo children? She quickly moved both babies to their makeshift nursery and composed herself before opening the trading post door. The elderly man stepped forward and spoke in accented but clear English. "I am Thomas Begay, medicine man of the Red Rock clan. We seek word of 2 children who disappeared during the great dust storm." Kate's mouth went dry, but she forced herself to respond calmly. "Please come inside. We can talk more comfortably out of the heat." The 3 men entered the trading post with the quiet dignity that Kate had learned to associate with traditional Navajo leaders. Thomas Begay's eyes immediately began scanning the interior of the building, taking in every detail with the practiced observation of someone accustomed to reading subtle signs. "You are Kate Brennan," Thomas said, settling onto one of the wooden chairs Kate provided for customers. "Your reputation among my people is good. They say you trade fairly and speak truth." "I try to conduct my business with honesty," Kate replied, acutely aware that she was about to be tested on that very principle. Thomas nodded slowly. "The children we seek are twins, a boy and a girl, perhaps 6 or 7 months old. Their parents were traveling to visit family when the storm struck. The wagon was found overturned, the horse dead, but the children—" He paused, pain flickering across his weathered features. The children were gone. Kate felt her world tilting. These were definitely the people searching for Little Moon and Desert Rose, but something about Thomas Begay's manner suggested there was more to the story than a simple family accident. "Were these children your relatives?" Kate asked carefully. Thomas exchanged glances with his companions before answering. "In a way, yes, but the situation is complex. The children's father is Joseph Crow Feather, one of our most respected medicine men and leaders. Their mother was his wife, Marie, who died in childbirth 6 months ago." Kate's heart clenched at this revelation. The twins were orphans, just as she had feared. Thomas continued, "Joseph was traveling with the children to bring them to their maternal grandmother, who lives near Canyon de Chelly. But Joseph himself disappeared during the storm. We found evidence that he tried to shield the wagon with his own body, but afterward—" Thomas shook his head. "No trace." The full magnitude of the situation crashed over Kate like a physical blow. Not only were the twins orphaned, but their father, apparently a man of great importance to the Navajo community, was missing and presumed dead. The children she had been caring for weren't just abandoned babies, they were the orphaned offspring of Navajo leadership, and their disappearance was probably causing tremendous upheaval within the tribe. "If their father is missing," Kate said slowly, "who has authority over the children?" "That is the question that divides our council," Thomas admitted. "Joseph Crow Feather had no brothers, and his clan connections are complicated. The children's maternal grandmother claims them by blood right, but she is very old and lives in isolation. Other families have offered to adopt them, but each offer creates political tensions. One of the younger men spoke up, addressing Thomas in rapid Navajo. Kate couldn't understand the words, but the tone suggested urgency and possibly disagreement. Thomas nodded to his companion, then turned back to Kate. "My nephew reminds me that we must also consider the prophecy." "Prophecy?" Kate asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "Joseph Crow Feather was known for his visions," Thomas explained. "Before the children were born, he spoke of a dream in which his son and daughter would be saved by a woman who lived between two worlds, someone who honored both white and Navajo ways. He said this woman would protect them during a time of great danger, and through her actions, the children would grow to become bridges between our peoples." Kate felt a chill run down her spine, despite the desert heat. "You think I'm this woman from the prophecy?" Thomas studied her face with eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "I think you have 2 Navajo children in your home who should be dead but are very much alive. I think you risked your own life to save them during a storm that killed experienced warriors, and I think you have been caring for them with a love that has nothing to do with duty and everything to do with heart." The directness of his statement left Kate speechless. She realized that denying the twins' presence was pointless. Thomas Begay clearly knew they were here, probably had known before he even arrived. "What happens now?" Kate asked. "Now we must decide what is best for the children," Thomas replied. "But first, I would like to see them. It has been many weeks since they disappeared, and our people have mourned them as dead." Kate hesitated for a moment, then made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. She led the 3 men to the back room, where Little Moon and Desert Rose were playing with wooden blocks on a blanket spread across the floor. The transformation that came over Thomas Begay was immediate and profound. The dignified medicine man dropped to his knees beside the babies, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks as he spoke to them in soft Navajo words. Both children looked up at him with bright, curious eyes, showing no fear despite the fact that he was a stranger. Little Moon reached up and touched Thomas's face with one small hand, making soft cooing sounds. Desert Rose crawled toward him with the determined mobility she had recently mastered, grabbing onto his traditional shirt and pulling herself into a sitting position. "They know me," Thomas whispered in amazement. "Children this young should not remember, but they know the sound of their own language, the scent of their own people." Kate watched the reunion with mixed emotions. The love and relief in Thomas's eyes were unmistakable, but she also felt a growing sense of loss as she realized the twins would soon be leaving her care. "They're healthy and strong," Kate said softly. "I've been feeding them goat's milk and corn mash, and they seem to thrive on it. Desert Rose, the girl, is very determined and active. Little Moon, the boy, is gentler but very observant." Thomas looked up at her with something approaching awe. "You have given them names." "Just nicknames," Kate said quickly. "I didn't know their real names. Their Navajo names are Ashki Twij Nalni, boy who shines like silver, and Ateed, Ojun, girl who walks in beauty, but the names you chose." Thomas smiled. "Little Moon and Desert Rose, very appropriate." One of the younger men approached and knelt beside Thomas, speaking quietly in Navajo while observing the children. Kate caught a few words she recognized, references to health, strength, and something about spirits or blessings. Thomas translated, "My nephew Haustin says the children show signs of strong medicine. They have not only survived, but thrived under your care. He believes this is confirmation of Joseph's prophecy." Kate felt overwhelmed by the weight of expectation in Thomas's words. "I just did what anyone would do. They needed help." "No," Thomas said firmly, rising to his feet while still holding Desert Rose. "Anyone would have stayed safely inside during the storm. Anyone would have reported finding Indian children to the authorities. Anyone would have treated them as a burden or a problem to be solved. He paused, studying Kate's face. You have treated them as your own children. That is not what anyone would do. That is what the right person would do. The conversation that followed would change everything Kate thought she knew about her situation. Thomas explained that the Navajo Council had been divided about how to handle the twins' disappearance. Some wanted to conduct a massive search that might bring unwanted attention from federal authorities. Others believed the children had perished and wanted to hold traditional funeral ceremonies. But a small group, led by Thomas himself, had insisted on quietly investigating every possibility. They had spoken to traders, miners, ranchers, and travelers throughout the region. Kate's trading post had always been a logical place to search, but approaching her directly would have been risky if she had reported the children to authorities or if Deputy Hartwell had been monitoring the situation. We have been watching your trading post for several days, Thomas admitted. We saw no signs of federal agents, no unusual activity from the town. We saw you hanging small clothes to dry, heard sounds of children when the wind was right. We knew. Kate realized she'd been living under observation without even knowing it. The thought should have been frightening, but instead she felt oddly comforted. If the Navajo had wanted to take the children by force, they could have done so at any time. The fact that Thomas had approached her openly suggested they respected her role in saving the twins. What happens now? Kate asked again. Thomas settled back into his chair, still holding Desert Rose, who seemed perfectly content in his arms. Now we must discuss the future. The children cannot remain here indefinitely. Deputy Hartwell is asking questions, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs is increasing their interference in tribal affairs, but they also cannot simply disappear into the reservation without causing political problems. Kate felt her heart sink. She had known this moment would come, but she wasn't prepared for the finality of it. However, Thomas continued, there may be another way. Joseph Crowfeather's prophecy spoke of the woman who would save his children, serving as a bridge between worlds. Perhaps that role is not finished when the rescue is complete. Kate looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean that these children have already been torn between two worlds by circumstances beyond their control. Their father was a progressive leader who believed Navajo people must learn to navigate white society while maintaining their traditional ways. Perhaps his children are meant to embody that balance. Thomas's words carried implications that Kate was afraid to hope for. Are you suggesting? I am suggesting that we explore possibilities, Thomas said carefully. The children need stability, love, and protection from the political storms that surround Indian affairs. You have already provided all three, but they also need connection to their people, their language, their spiritual traditions. Perhaps there is a way to provide both. As the afternoon wore on, Kate found herself engaged in the most important negotiation of her life. Thomas Begay was proposing something unprecedented, a shared custody arrangement that would allow the twins to grow up with connections to both worlds while avoiding the bureaucratic nightmare that would result from official adoption procedures. The plan that emerged was complex and risky. Kate would continue caring for the children at her trading post, but Thomas and other tribal elders would visit regularly to ensure they learned Navajo language and customs. When the children were old enough, they would spend summers with their extended family on the reservation, learning traditional ways while returning to Kate for their formal education. It would require great trust from both sides, Thomas warned. My people would have to believe that you will honor your commitment to preserving the children's Navajo identity. You would have to trust that we will not simply take them away once they are old enough to be moved permanently. Kate looked down at Little Moon, who was contentedly chewing on a wooden toy she had carved for him. The thought of sharing these children with their extended family seemed both logical and terrifying. She had already lost so much in her life. Could she risk loving these babies knowing that her time with them would always be temporary and conditional? But as she watched Desert Rose babble happily in Thomas's arms, Kate realized that the choice wasn't really about her fears or desires. It was about what was best for two children who had already survived more trauma than most adults experience in a lifetime. "I need time to think about this," Kate said finally. Thomas nodded with understanding. "This is not a decision to make quickly. But know this, you have already done the hardest part. You have loved children who were not born to you, protected them when they had no one else, and helped them grow strong. Everything else is just details." As the three Navajo men prepared to leave, Thomas turned back to Kate with one final piece of information that would haunt her dreams for weeks to come. "There is something else you should know," he said quietly. "Joseph Crow Feather may not be dead. There have been reports of a Navajo man matching his description seen near the Mexican border, badly injured but alive. If he lives, if he returns, he will want to know who saved his children. And when that day comes, you will discover what it means to have earned the gratitude of one of the most powerful medicine men among the Diné people." Kate watched the three men ride away into the desert twilight, their figures gradually disappearing into the vast landscape that had shaped every aspect of life in this harsh and beautiful country. She stood holding both twins in her arms, feeling the weight of decisions that would affect not just her own future, but the destinies of two children who carried the hopes and fears of an entire people. The easy part was over. Now came the real test of courage. 2 months after Thomas Begay's visit, Kate Brennan's carefully constructed world began to unravel in ways she never could have anticipated. The shared custody arrangement had been working beautifully. The twins were thriving under the dual influence of Kate's nurturing care and the regular visits from Navajo elders who taught them traditional songs and spoke to them in their native language. Little Moon had begun crawling with determined purpose, while Desert Rose had discovered her voice and filled the trading post with joyful babbling that mixed English sounds with Navajo syllables. But the fragile peace shattered on a scorching August morning when Kate discovered that someone had been watching her trading post during the night. Fresh horse tracks circled the building, and several of her storage shed locks had been tampered with, though nothing appeared to be missing. More disturbing were the gouges in the dirt near her well, marks that suggested someone had been digging, searching for something specific. Kate's unease deepened when she found a crumpled piece of paper wedged under her front door. The message, written in crude block letters, was brief but chilling. "Squaw lover, we know what you're hiding. Last warning." The hate-filled words hit Kate like a physical blow. Someone in Redemption Falls had discovered her secret and was threatening to expose her. But the crude language and cowardly anonymity suggested this wasn't official government pressure. It was something far more dangerous and unpredictable. Kate immediately secured the twins in the most protected area of her trading post and began preparing for siege. She cleaned her rifles, counted her ammunition, and positioned weapons at strategic locations throughout the building. If vigilantes from town were planning to attack her, she would be ready to defend the children with her life. But the threat materialized from an unexpected direction. That afternoon, while Kate was feeding the twins their midday meal, a military patrol arrived at her trading post. Not the local sheriff or federal marshals she had been expecting, but genuine U.S. Army cavalry led by Captain William Morrison, a stern career officer whose reputation for dealing harshly with Indian troubles was known throughout the territory. Captain Morrison dismounted with the mechanical precision of a man who had spent decades turning human complexity into military problems with military solutions. Behind him rode a full squad of cavalry soldiers, their weapons conspicuously displayed and their expressions coldly professional. "Miss Brennan," Morrison announced without preamble, "I'm here on orders from Colonel James Patterson, commanding officer of Fort Defiance. We have reports of unauthorized collaboration with hostile native elements." Kate stepped outside to meet the patrol, her heart hammering with terror, but her expression carefully controlled. "Captain Morrison, I'm not sure what reports you're referring to. I run a legal trading post with proper federal licensing." Morrison's pale blue eyes studied Kate with the calculating assessment of a predator evaluating prey. "The reports suggest you may be harboring Indian children without proper documentation. Such actions constitute federal crimes under the Indian Removal and Assimilation Acts." The captain's words confirmed Kate's worst fears. Someone had reported her to military authorities, and the situation was now completely beyond her control. Unlike Deputy Hartwell's implied threats, this was official federal action with the full weight of military law behind it. "I'm not sure who's been spreading rumors," Kate replied carefully, "but I think you'll find my business affairs are in complete order." Morrison signaled to his men, who immediately began spreading out around the trading post in a standard search formation. "Miss Brennan, we have authority to search any premises suspected of harboring fugitive Indians or stolen Indian property. I strongly advise you to cooperate fully." Kate felt panic rising in her chest. The twins were inside, probably napping in their makeshift nursery. If the soldiers found them, both children would be immediately seized and transported to government institutions designed to strip away every trace of their native identity. She had heard horrific stories about these places. Children forbidden to speak their native languages, punished for practicing traditional customs, subjected to physical and psychological abuse intended to kill the Indian and save the man. "Captain," Kate said, thinking desperately, "surely you don't need a full military patrol to search one woman's trading post. If you're looking for something specific, perhaps you could tell me what it is." Morrison's expression remained impassive. "We're looking for evidence of illegal collaboration with hostile tribal elements. There have been reports of secret meetings, unauthorized exchanges of information, and possible harboring of individuals wanted for questioning by federal authorities." Kate realized that the situation was far more complex than she had understood. Someone wasn't just reporting her care of the twins, they were accusing her of espionage or sedition, crimes that could result in imprisonment or even execution during wartime. "I trade with local Navajo families," Kate said firmly. "It's legal. Commerce, properly documented and taxed. If someone has accused me of illegal activities, I have the right to know who and what specifically I'm being charged with." Morrison stepped closer, close enough that Kate could smell the leather and gunpowder scent that clung to his uniform. "Miss Brennan, the United States Army doesn't negotiate with suspected collaborators. You will allow us to search your premises, or you will be arrested for obstruction of federal law enforcement." At that moment, as if summoned by Kate's desperation, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the desert. But these weren't more cavalry. The rhythmic hoofbeats had the distinctive pattern of unshod horses ridden by expert horsemen. Kate looked toward the sound and felt her heart leap with a mixture of hope and terror. Thomas Begay was approaching with a group of 12 Navajo warriors, riding directly toward the military patrol with the calm confidence of men who feared nothing on earth. The timing couldn't have been more perfect or more dangerous. Captain Morrison immediately drew his sidearm and shouted orders to his men. "Hostile Indians approaching! Take defensive positions!" "Captain, wait!" Kate called out desperately. "Those men aren't hostile. Thomas Begay is a respected tribal elder who trades here regularly." But Morrison was already in full military mode, treating the approaching Navajo riders as a potential attack force. His soldiers raised their rifles and took aim, creating a standoff that could explode into violence with the slightest provocation. Thomas Begay seemed utterly unconcerned by the military weapons pointed at him. He rode straight toward Captain Morrison with the dignified bearing of a man conducting diplomatic business, his warriors following in perfect formation behind him. "I am Thomas Begay of the Red Rock Clan," the medicine man announced in clear English as he dismounted 20 feet from the soldiers. "I come to speak with Kate Brennan about trade matters." Morrison kept his weapon trained on Thomas while shouting, "You are trespassing on a federal investigation. Withdraw immediately or face military action." Thomas looked at the captain with the patient expression of an adult dealing with a tantruming child. "This is Navajo land, soldier. We have treaty rights to trade here. Your authority does not extend to preventing lawful commerce." The confrontation that followed revealed the complex web of jurisdictional confusion that plagued Indian Territory in 1934. Captain Morrison insisted he had federal authority to investigate suspected collaboration with hostile Indians. Thomas Begay cited treaty rights that guaranteed Navajo access to traditional trading locations. Kate found herself caught between military law and tribal sovereignty, with the lives of 2 innocent children hanging in the balance. "Captain Morrison," Thomas said with elaborate courtesy, "perhaps there has been some misunderstanding. Miss Brennan has been a friend to my people for many years. She trades fairly and honors her agreements. What exactly do you believe she has done wrong?" Morrison's jaw tightened with frustration. "We have reports that she may be harboring Indian children illegally taken from their families." Thomas nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this accusation seriously. "That would indeed be a serious crime. Of course, it would also be a serious crime to separate Indian children from families who have legal custody of them." Kate watched this exchange with growing amazement. Thomas Begay was engaging in sophisticated legal maneuvering that suggested he understood federal law far better than Morrison had expected from a primitive Indian. "What are you implying?" Morrison demanded. "I am suggesting that before you arrest anyone for child theft, you might want to ensure that the children in question are actually stolen," Thomas replied calmly. "It would be embarrassing for the United States Army to discover they had separated a legal guardian from children who were properly in her care." Morrison's confidence wavered slightly. "Legal guardian? Miss Brennan has no Indian children in her legal custody." Thomas smiled with the satisfaction of a lawyer who had just trapped an opponent in a logical contradiction. "Captain, how can you be certain what legal arrangements exist between Miss Brennan and tribal authorities? Are you familiar with traditional Navajo adoption customs? Do you understand the legal status of children placed in protective custody under tribal law?" Kate realized that Thomas was buying time and creating confusion, but she didn't understand his ultimate strategy. The twins were still hidden inside the trading post, and eventually Morrison would insist on searching the building regardless of jurisdictional arguments. The situation took another dramatic turn when one of Morrison's soldiers approached and whispered urgently in his ear. The captain's expression darkened as he listened, and Kate caught fragments of the report. "Riders approaching from the north. Large group. Armed." Morrison raised his field glasses and scanned the northern horizon. What he saw there made him curse under his breath. "Sergeant Williams, how many riders do you count?" "At least 50, sir, possibly more. They're still too far out to get an accurate count." Thomas Begay followed Morrison's gaze with apparent unconcern. "Ah," he said mildly, "it appears the trading party I mentioned has arrived." Kate felt her blood turn to ice. A force of 50 or more Navajo warriors was approaching her trading post, while a U.S. Army patrol was conducting a federal investigation. The potential for catastrophic violence was growing by the minute. trading party? Morrison snapped. That's a war party. Thomas shook his head with the patient dignity that characterized all his interactions with white authorities. Captain, those men carry no war paint. They fly no battle flags. They approach openly in daylight, with no attempt at concealment. This is how traders travel when they wish to conduct significant business. But even as Thomas spoke, Kate could see that the approaching riders were indeed heavily armed and moving with military precision. Whatever was happening, it was far more complex than a simple trading expedition. Morrison made a quick tactical decision. Miss Brennan, I'm placing you under protective custody. Sergeant Williams, prepare the men for potential hostilities. Captain, wait, Kate said desperately. If you start a fight here, innocent people will die. Let me talk to Thomas. Let me help diffuse this situation. Morrison studied Kate's face, clearly torn between military protocol and practical reality. A battle between cavalry and Navajo warriors at her trading post would result in massive casualties and political consequences that could destabilize the entire region. 5 minutes, Morrison said finally. You have 5 minutes to convince these Indians to withdraw peacefully. Kate turned to Thomas, switching to the Navajo phrases she had learned over the years. Grandfather, what is happening? Why are so many warriors coming here? Thomas's response was delivered in rapid Navajo that Kate could only partially understand, but the words she caught made her knees weak. Joseph Crow Feather, alive, returns, children, honor ceremony. Kate felt the world spinning around her. Joseph Crow Feather, the twins' father, was alive and approaching with what appeared to be a war party. The father, whose children she had been secretly caring for, was about to arrive in the middle of a federal investigation with enough warriors to fight a small war. Thomas, Kate whispered in English. The children are inside, if the soldiers find them now. Thomas nodded with grim understanding. Joseph comes to reclaim his children and to honor the woman who saved them, but he does not know about the soldiers. Kate realized they were trapped in a situation that could only end in disaster. If Joseph Crow Feather arrived expecting a peaceful reunion with his children, he would instead find a military patrol prepared for battle. If Captain Morrison discovered the twins, he would arrest Kate and seize the children just as their father arrived to rescue them. Can you get word to Joseph? Kate asked urgently. Can you warn him about the soldiers? Thomas looked toward the approaching riders, now close enough that individual figures were becoming visible. Too late. He comes with the full honor guard, 200 warriors sent to escort the children home and to witness the ceremony that will make you family to the Navajo people. Kate felt her heart stop. 200 warriors, not 50 as Morrison had estimated, but a force large enough to overwhelm the cavalry patrol and lay siege to Redemption Falls itself. Captain Morrison, who had been listening to their exchange, stepped forward with his weapon raised. What ceremony? What are you talking about? Thomas turned to face the captain with the magnificent dignity of a man who had lived through the conquest of his people and survived with his honor intact. Captain Morrison, you are about to witness something that has never happened in the history of relations between the Navajo Nation and the United States government. Joseph Crow Feather comes to adopt a white woman into our tribe, to make her the mother of his children and a bridge between our peoples. Morrison's face went white with shock. That's impossible. Federal law prohibits many things, Thomas interrupted quietly, but Navajo law is older than your government, and some bonds transcend the authority of any nation. As the thunder of approaching hoofbeats grew louder, Kate realized that everything she thought, she understood about her situation had been wrong. She wasn't just caring for orphaned children. She was about to become the focal point of a confrontation between two nations, two legal systems, and two completely different ways of understanding family, loyalty, and honor, the twins she had. rescued from a dust storm, were about to reunite with their father, but not in the peaceful ceremony Thomas had originally envisioned. Instead, their reunion would take place under the guns of the United States Army, with the future of white Navajo relations hanging in the balance. Kate looked toward the approaching cloud of dust that marked Joseph Crow Feather's arrival and realized that her simple act of compassion during a storm was about to change the course of history in ways she never could have imagined. The woman who had saved 2 babies was about to discover what it meant to stand between worlds when those worlds were on the brink of war. Inside the trading post, Little Moon and Desert Rose continued their afternoon nap, oblivious to the fact that their father was coming home with enough warriors to fight the United States Army if necessary. And outside, Kate Brennan prepared to face the most important moment of her life, the moment when she would finally meet the man whose children had become her own, and discover whether love could bridge the gap between peoples who seemed destined to remain forever enemies. The ground beneath Kate's feet vibrated with the thunder of 200 horses as Joseph Crow Feather's war party crested the ridge overlooking her trading post. What she saw took her breath away, not a ragtag group of raiders, but a magnificent display of Navajo military power arranged in perfect formation. Warriors on painted horses carried traditional weapons alongside modern rifles, their faces marked with ceremonial paint that gleamed like liquid copper in the harsh desert sun. At the center of this awesome force rode a man who could only be Joseph Crow Feather himself. Even at a distance, Kate could see that he possessed the commanding presence of a born leader. Tall and broad-shouldered, he sat his horse with the easy grace of someone who had been riding since childhood. His long black hair was woven with silver ornaments that caught the light, and across his chest he wore a breastplate of polished bone and turquoise that marked him as a man of the highest rank among his people. Captain Morrison's cavalry patrol was hopelessly outnumbered, but the professional soldiers maintained their discipline even as they realized the magnitude of the force approaching them. Morrison himself had gone pale beneath his sunburn, but his voice remained steady as he shouted orders to his men. "Sergeant Williams, send 2 riders back to Fort Defiance immediately. Tell Colonel Patterson we have a potential uprising situation and request immediate reinforcement." Thomas Begay stepped forward, positioning himself between the 2 opposing forces with the calm authority of a man accustomed to preventing wars through words rather than weapons. "Captain Morrison, I suggest you do not send for reinforcements. This is not an attack. It is a ceremonial procession. Any military action you take against it will be interpreted as an act of war against the Navajo nation." Morrison's jaw tightened with frustration and fear. "I don't care what you call it. 200 armed Indians approaching a federal installation constitutes a hostile act. This is not a federal installation," Thomas replied, with elaborate patience. "This is a private trading post on land granted to the Navajo people by treaty. Joseph Crow Feather has every right to be here." Kate found herself caught between terror and awe as she watched the massive war party approach. The discipline and coordination of the riders was breathtaking. They moved like a single organism, responding to subtle signals from their leaders with precision that would have impressed any military commander. But more striking than their martial skill was the sense of purpose that radiated from every warrior. These men weren't here for conquest or revenge. They were here for something far more important. The war parties stopped approximately 100 yards from the trading post, close enough for individual faces to be clearly visible, but far enough to avoid appearing immediately threatening. Joseph Crow Feather dismounted from his horse, a magnificent stallion painted with symbols that Kate didn't recognize, but somehow understood to represent spiritual protection, and walked forward with 3 other men who were obviously senior leaders. Kate's first clear look at the twins' father confirmed everything Thomas Begay had told her about his importance among the Navajo people. Joseph Crowfeather was a man in his early 30s, but his eyes held the wisdom of someone much older. His face was classically handsome in the way of his people. High cheekbones, strong jaw, and skin bronzed by decades under the desert sun. But it was his bearing that truly marked him as extraordinary. He moved with the fluid confidence of a natural leader, someone accustomed to making life and death decisions and bearing the weight of his people's hopes. More importantly for Kate, she could see unmistakable traces of both twins in their father's features. Little Moon had inherited Joseph's thoughtful eyes and the distinctive shape of his nose. Desert Rose had her father's determined chin and the graceful way he carried himself. Joseph stopped 10 feet from Captain Morrison and spoke in accented but clear English. "I am Joseph Crowfeather, medicine man and war leader of the Red Rock clan. I come to reclaim my children and to honor the woman who saved their lives." Morrison's hand remained on his sidearm as he replied, "I am Captain William Morrison, United States Army. You are in violation of federal law by approaching a government investigation with an armed force." Joseph's expression didn't change, but Kate could sense the dangerous undercurrent in his stillness. "Captain Morrison, my children were taken from me by a storm sent by the spirits to test my faith. The same spirits guided them to safety in the hands of a woman whose heart knows no boundaries between peoples. I come to fulfill a sacred obligation that is older than your government and more binding than your laws." The confrontation between the two men was electric with tension, but it was interrupted by a sound that changed everything, the distinctive cry of a baby from inside Kate's trading post. Little Moon had awakened from his nap and was calling for attention, with the vocal intensity that had become his trademark. Joseph Crowfeather's entire body went rigid at the sound. His eyes, which had remained carefully neutral during his exchange with Captain Morrison, suddenly blazed with emotion that was impossible to mistake. This was a father hearing his child's voice for the first time in months, and the pain and joy of that recognition was written across his face in lines that spoke of sleepless nights and endless searching. "My son," Joseph whispered. The words, barely audible, but carrying such intensity that everyone present felt the power of them. Captain Morrison's expression hardened as he realized what the baby's cry meant. "Miss Brennan, you will produce any children in your custody immediately for federal inspection." Kate felt panic rising in her chest. The moment she had been dreading for months was finally here, but it was happening under the worst possible circumstances. Instead of a quiet reunion between father and children, she was about to witness a confrontation that could spark a war. "Captain," Kate said desperately, "please let me explain the situation. These children—" "Miss Brennan," Morrison interrupted sharply, "you are under federal investigation for child theft. You will surrender any children in your custody immediately, or you will be arrested for obstruction of justice." Joseph Crowfeather took a step forward, his hand moving toward the knife at his belt. "No man will take my children from the woman who saved them." The tension reached a breaking point as both military and tribal forces prepared for violence. Morrison's soldiers raised their rifles, while Joseph's warriors readied their weapons in response. Kate realized that within seconds, the area around her trading post would become a battlefield. But before anyone could fire the first shot, Desert Rose's voice joined her brothers from inside the building. Her crying had a different quality than Little Moon's, more demanding, more insistent, and somehow more heartbreaking. The sound of his daughter's distress broke through Joseph Crowfeather's warrior composure completely. "Ashki and Ataed," he said, using the twins' Navajo names. "They are alive. They are truly alive." Kate saw tears streaming down the proud warrior's face and realized that despite all the reports and reassurances he had received, Joseph had never quite allowed himself to believe his children had survived. Hearing their voices for the first time since the storm was confirmation of a miracle he had feared to hope for. Acting on pure instinct, Kate made a decision that would either save the situation or destroy it completely. She walked directly into the space between the opposing forces, her hands raised to show she carried no weapons. "Captain Morrison, Joseph Crow Feather, please listen to me," she called out, her voice carrying clearly in the desert stillness. "I am going inside to get the children. They're frightened by all the noise and tension out here. When I bring them out, you will see 2 babies who are healthy, happy and loved. Nothing else matters right now except their welfare." Morrison started to object, but Kate cut him off. "Captain, these children are 6 months old. They are not a threat to federal security, and they deserve better than to be terrorized by armed men shouting at each other." Without waiting for permission, Kate turned and walked toward her trading post. Behind her, she could hear Morrison cursing and Joseph speaking rapidly in Navajo to his warriors, probably telling them to hold their positions no matter what happened. Inside the building, Kate found both twins wide awake and clearly agitated by the commotion outside. Little Moon was standing in his makeshift crib, gripping the wooden rails with tiny hands and calling out with increasing urgency. Desert Rose was lying on her back, but kicking her legs vigorously, her cries becoming more insistent by the minute. Kate picked up both children, holding them against her chest, in the way that had become as natural as breathing over the past months. "It's all right, my darlings," she whispered, in the mixture of English and Navajo words she had learned to use with them. "Your papa has come home. He's been looking for you, and now he's here." As she spoke, both babies began to calm. Little Moon's crying subsided to soft whimpers, while Desert Rose seemed to be listening intently to Kate's voice. These children had learned to trust her completely, and her presence was enough to reassure them even in the midst of chaos. Kate carried the twins outside, where 200 warriors and a cavalry patrol waited in tense silence. The moment she appeared with the babies, a collective intake of breath could be heard from the Navajo forces. Many of these men had participated in the search for the missing children, and seeing them alive and healthy was clearly emotional for the entire war party. But the most dramatic reaction came from Joseph Crowfeather himself. The powerful medicine man dropped to his knees the moment he saw his children, his warrior's composure completely abandoned in favor of a father's overwhelming joy. He spoke rapidly in Navajo, words that Kate couldn't understand, but whose meaning was unmistakable, prayers of thanksgiving, expressions of love, promises that he would never let them go again. Kate walked slowly toward Joseph, acutely aware that every eye was on her. When she reached him, she knelt as well, bringing the babies to his eye level. "Joseph Crowfeather," she said formally, "I return to you your son Ashki Twijnalni and your daughter Ateed Hojun. They have been safe and loved, and they have grown strong." While waiting for your return, Joseph's hands trembled as he reached out to touch his children's faces. Little Moon looked at his father with the intense curiosity that was his nature, while Desert Rose seemed to study this new person with the critical assessment she applied to everything unfamiliar. "Do they know me?" Joseph asked quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "They know your voice," Kate replied. "I have sung them the Navajo lullabies Thomas B. Gay taught me. I have spoken their names in your language. They know they are loved by people they have never seen." Joseph gently took Little Moon from Kate's arms, holding his son with the careful tenderness of a man who had dreamed of this moment every day for months. The baby studied his father's face intently, then reached out with one small hand to touch the silver ornaments in Joseph's hair. The reunion might have continued peacefully, but Captain Morrison chose that moment to reassert his authority. "Miss Brennan, step away from the Indians immediately. You are under arrest for violation of federal law regarding the custody of Indian children." Joseph's head snapped up at Morrison's words, his eyes blazing with fury. "No white soldier will arrest the woman who saved my children." Morrison drew, his sidearm, pointing it directly at Joseph. "You are all under arrest for violation of federal territory and conspiracy to harbor fugitive Indians." The situation exploded into chaos. Joseph's warriors immediately raised their weapons, while Morrison's soldiers responded in kind. Kate found herself literally caught in the crossfire, holding Desert Rose while Joseph clutched Little Moon. But before anyone could fire, Thomas Begay's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Captain Morrison, before you start a war over children, you might want to consider the legal implications of your actions." Morrison kept his weapon trained on Joseph, but glanced toward the old medicine man. "What legal implications?" "The implications of arresting a man for reclaiming his own children from a woman who was caring for them with tribal authorization," Thomas replied calmly. "The implications of attacking a ceremonial procession that is protected under federal treaty law. The implications of explaining to your superiors why you started a war over a custody dispute." Morrison's confidence wavered slightly. "These children were reported as stolen. We have federal authority to investigate child theft." Thomas nodded, thoughtfully. "Indeed. But tell me, Captain, who reported the children as stolen? And how can children be stolen from their father when their father is standing right here claiming them?" Kate suddenly understood Thomas's strategy. The original. Reports of child theft had come from sources who believed the twins were orphans. But with Joseph Crowfeather present, and clearly the children's father, the entire legal foundation for Morrison's investigation had collapsed. "The children were abandoned," Morrison insisted, "found without adult supervision." "The children were lost in a storm and found by a woman who cared for them until their father could reclaim them," Thomas corrected. "That is not child theft, that is heroism." Joseph Crowfeather slowly stood, still holding Little Moon, his eyes never leaving Morrison's face. "Captain, I am grateful beyond words to the woman who saved my children, but I am also a war leader of the Navajo nation, and I will not allow her to be harmed for showing kindness to my family." The threat in Joseph's words was unmistakable, and Morrison was experienced enough to recognize when he was facing a warrior who would fight to the death if necessary. Around them, 200 Navajo warriors waited for their leader's signal, while Morrison's small patrol prepared for a battle they could not possibly win. The standoff might have ended in massacre, but Kate made a decision that changed everything. Still holding Desert Rose, she walked to a position directly between Morrison's gun and Joseph's chest. "Captain Morrison," she said clearly, "I am Catherine Brennan, legal owner of this trading post and the woman who found these children after the storm. If you want to arrest someone, arrest me. But Joseph Crowfeather has committed no crime except loving his children enough to search for them." Morrison's face flushed with anger and frustration. "Miss Brennan, you are obstructing a federal investigation." I am protecting the welfare of 2 babies who have been through enough trauma," Kate replied firmly. "These children need their father, not another confrontation with armed men." Joseph looked at Kate with something approaching awe. "You would stand between me and the soldier's gun." "I would stand between these children and anyone who would harm them," Kate replied simply. The moment stretched into eternity as Morrison weighed his options. Starting a battle would almost certainly result in his patrol's annihilation, but retreating would mean admitting that his investigation had been based on false information. Around them, the tension was so thick it seemed to shimmer in the desert heat. Finally, Thomas Begay provided the solution that would allow Morrison to save face. "Captain, perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. Miss Brennan was clearly providing temporary care for children whose father was missing. Now that the father has returned, the situation is resolved. No crime has been committed by anyone." Morrison slowly lowered his weapon, recognizing the wisdom of Thomas's words. This matter will be reported to my commanding officer. There will be a full investigation of all circumstances. Of course, Thomas agreed pleasantly, and I'm sure that investigation will confirm that Miss Brennan acted with complete legality and admirable compassion. As the immediate threat of violence receded, Kate finally allowed herself to look around at the incredible scene surrounding her. 200 Navajo warriors sat their horses in perfect silence, weapons ready but held at rest. Joseph Crow Feather held his son with tears of joy streaming down his weathered face, and she stood at the center of it all, holding Desert Rose and marveling at how a simple act of kindness had led to this moment of historical significance. But Kate also realized that the day's events had fundamentally changed her relationship with both communities. She was no longer just a trader who helped Navajo families in need. She had become the woman who stood between bullets and babies, who defied federal authority to protect children, who earned the loyalty of warriors by showing courage under fire. Joseph Crow Feather gently placed Little Moon back in Kate's arms, then did something that surprised everyone present. He removed a silver and turquoise necklace from around his neck, clearly a piece of great personal and spiritual significance, and placed it carefully around Kate's neck. "This belonged to my wife," he said quietly. "She wore it when our children were born. Now it belongs to the woman who became their mother when I could not be their father." The gesture was so profound, so laden with meaning, that even Captain Morrison seemed moved by it. Kate felt the weight of the necklace and understood that she was being offered something far more valuable than jewelry. She was being offered a place in Joseph Crow Feather's family and in the history of his people. "Joseph," she said softly, "I was honored to care for your children, but they belong with you, with their people. I was just keeping them safe until you could come home." Joseph smiled, and for the first time Kate saw not the powerful medicine man or the feared war leader, but simply a father grateful beyond words for his children's safety. "Kate Brennan, you saved my children's lives, but you did more than that. You loved them, and now if you will accept it, you will always be part of their family." Around them, 200 warriors began a low chant that spoke of honor, gratitude, and bonds that transcended the boundaries between peoples. Kate realized that her simple act of compassion during a dust storm had led to something unprecedented in the history of white Indian relations. A moment of genuine understanding and mutual respect between two worlds that had been at war for generations. The day was far from over, but Kate already knew that nothing would ever be the same again. As Captain Morrison's cavalry patrol retreated toward Fort Defiance, leaving clouds of dust in their wake, the atmosphere around Kate's trading post underwent a remarkable transformation. What had moments before been the site of a potential massacre became the stage for something unprecedented in the history of white Indian relations. The 200 Navajo warriors who had arrived prepared for battle now began preparing for ceremony. Kate watched in amazement as the disciplined military formation dissolved into organized chaos. Warriors dismounted and began unpacking supplies from hidden bundles. Ceremonial clothing, sacred objects, musical instruments, and materials for what appeared to be an extended celebration. The efficiency with which they worked suggested this had all been planned in advance, every detail choreographed for maximum symbolic impact. Joseph Crow Feather stood holding both his children, tears still glistening on his weathered cheeks, as he spoke rapidly in Navajo to Thomas Bigay and the other tribal elders. Kate couldn't understand most of the words, but she caught references to ceremonies, spirits, and something about making family. The intensity of the discussion suggested they were debating complex matters of tribal lore and tradition. Thomas Bigay approached Kate with the dignified bearing that marked all his interactions with serious matters. "Kate Brennan, Joseph Crow Feather wishes to speak with you about the ceremony that will honor your care of his children." Kate looked around at the bustling activity surrounding her trading post. "Thomas, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I understand what's happening here. Captain Morrison is probably already sending word to his superiors about what he witnessed. This could bring more federal interference." Thomas nodded gravely. "That is possible. But Joseph believes, and our council agrees, that some actions transcend political considerations. What you did for his children represents the best of what can exist between our peoples. That must be acknowledged properly, regardless of the consequences." Joseph approached them, still cradling Little Moon, while Desert Rose had claimed his other arm. The sight of this powerful warrior transformed into a devoted father was both heartwarming and slightly surreal. When he spoke, his voice carried the formal cadence of someone making an official proclamation. "Kate Brennan, for 4 moons you have been mother to my children when I could not be their father. You fed them when they were hungry, comforted them when they cried, and protected them when they were threatened. Among my people, such actions create bonds that are sacred and eternal." Kate felt overwhelmed by the formality of his words. "Joseph, I did what anyone would do. I couldn't let children suffer." Joseph shook his head firmly. "No, not anyone. Many would have turned away. Many would have feared the consequences. Many would have seen only Indian babies, not children needing love." He paused, studying her face with those penetrating dark eyes. "You saw my children as your children. That makes you their mother in the eyes of the spirits." Thomas stepped forward to explain what Joseph's words meant in practical terms. "Kate, Joseph is offering you formal adoption into the Red Rock clan. This would make you legally and spiritually the mother of Ashki and Ataid, with all the rights and responsibilities that relationship entails." Kate felt her knees go weak. "Adoption? But I'm white. I'm not Navajo. I don't understand your customs or your language well enough to—" "Color of skin does not determine the color of heart," Joseph interrupted gently. "Language can be learned. Customs can be taught. But the love you have shown my children, that comes from something deeper than culture or blood." Around them, the warriors continued their preparations with increasing excitement. Kate could see elaborate costumes being unpacked, drums being assembled, and what appeared to be a large ceremonial fire being constructed at a respectful distance from her trading post. "What would this adoption mean exactly?" Kate asked, still struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what was being offered. Thomas and Joseph exchanged glances before Thomas began explaining the complex implications. "Under Navajo law, you would become Joseph's sister through the bond of shared children. The twins would legally have 2 mothers, their birth mother who walks with the spirits, and you who saved their lives. You would have the right to participate in all decisions about their upbringing, their education, their marriages when they reach adulthood." Joseph added, "You would also have the protection of the Red Rock clan. Any threat to you would be considered a threat to our family. Any honor shown to you would honor all of us." Kate looked down at the twins, who were contentedly surveying the bustling activity around them. Little Moon seemed fascinated by the colorful preparations, while Desert Rose was attempting to grab the silver ornaments in her father's hair. These children had become the center of her world over the past months, and the thought of losing them was almost unbearable. "What about practical considerations?" Kate asked. "Where would the children live? How would they be educated? What about the federal authorities who might still cause problems?" Joseph's expression grew thoughtful as he considered these legitimate concerns. "The children would spend their early years here with you, learning both ways of life. You have already given them a good beginning. They are healthy, intelligent, and loved. As they grow older, they would divide their time between this place and the reservation, learning Navajo traditions alongside the white man's knowledge." Thomas added, "As for federal authorities, an adoption recognized by tribal law carries significant Wait under treaty provisions. The government would find it much more difficult to interfere with children who have a legal guardian recognized by both white and Indian law. Kate realized they were offering her something unprecedented, a chance to maintain her relationship with the twins while ensuring they remained connected to their heritage. But she also understood the magnitude of the commitment they were asking her to make. "If I agree to this," Kate said slowly, "I would be bound to honor Navajo law and customs. I would be responsible to the clan for how the children are raised. I couldn't just make decisions based on my own judgment." "That is correct," Joseph acknowledged, "but you would also have the wisdom of the elders to guide you, the support of the clan to help you, and the knowledge that your children would grow up understanding both worlds." As they spoke, one of the younger warriors approached and spoke urgently to Joseph in rapid Navajo. Joseph's expression darkened as he listened, and Kate caught enough words to understand that the messenger was reporting movement from the direction of Redemption Falls. "What is it?" Kate asked, though she already suspected the answer. Thomas translated grimly. "Riders approaching from the town, perhaps 20 or 30 men, armed and moving with purpose." Kate's heart sank. The confrontation with Captain Morrison had apparently triggered exactly the response she had feared: vigilante action from the white community. The men of Redemption Falls, already suspicious of her trading relationships with the Navajo, had probably interpreted the presence of 200 warriors as confirmation of their worst fears about Indian uprising. Joseph immediately shifted into military mode, his demeanor changing from that of a grateful father to that of a war leader assessing threats to his people. He spoke sharply to several of his warriors, who immediately began repositioning themselves in defensive formations around the trading post. "Joseph, please," Kate said urgently, "don't let this turn into a battle. Those men from town are afraid and angry, but they're not soldiers. If fighting starts here, innocent people will die." Joseph studied her face with those penetrating eyes. "You would protect the white men who come to harm you?" "I would protect anyone from unnecessary violence," Kate replied firmly. "That includes your warriors and the men from town." Thomas Begay stepped forward with a suggestion that would prove crucial to everything that followed. "Perhaps this is the perfect time for the adoption ceremony. If the men from Redemption Falls arrive to find not a war party, but a family celebration, it might change their understanding of what is happening here." Joseph considered this proposal with the careful deliberation of a leader accustomed to making decisions that affected many lives. "You believe a ceremony would calm their fears?" "I believe," Thomas said with a slight smile, "that it is very difficult to attack a celebration, especially one that includes children and women. The men from town may be angry, but they are not murderers." Kate realized the brilliant psychology behind Thomas's suggestion. By transforming the gathering from a military demonstration into a family ceremony, they would force the approaching vigilantes to confront their own prejudices about Indian intentions. "How long would the ceremony take?" Kate asked. Joseph's eyes lit with an emotion that looked like anticipation mixed with deep satisfaction. "A proper adoption ceremony should last from sunset to sunrise. It includes many elements: purification rituals, gift exchanges, storytelling, dancing, and the formal adoption vows themselves." Kate felt a moment of pure panic. "Joseph, I don't know your customs. I don't know the proper words or actions. What if I do something wrong and accidentally dishonor your family?" Joseph's stern expression softened into something that might have been amusement. "Kate Brennan, you have already honored my family more than any ceremony could. The rest is just tradition making visible what already exists in your heart." The sound of approaching horses was growing louder, and Kate could see dust clouds on the eastern horizon marking the vigilantes' advance. But around her, the Navajo warriors were transforming the area into something magical. Colorful blankets and banners were being strung between poles, creating a ceremonial space that seemed to exist outside ordinary time. Drums began a low, rhythmic beating that seemed to synchronize with the earth's heartbeat. Women had appeared among the warriors. Kate realized they must have been part of the procession, but had remained in the background during the military confrontation. Now they came forward carrying children of various ages, babies and toddlers, who would serve as witnesses to the ceremony. The presence of families transformed the gathering completely, making it obvious that this was not a war party, but a community celebration. Joseph handed Desert Rose to one of the Navajo women, an elderly matriarch whose bearing suggested high status within the clan, and began removing his military regalia. In its place, he donned ceremonial clothing that was breathtaking in its beauty and complexity. The outfit included a shirt woven with traditional patterns, leggings decorated with silver conchos, and a magnificent headdress incorporating eagle, feathers, turquoise, and silver work that must have represented generations of family wealth. "Kate," Thomas said gently, "if you consent to this ceremony, you too must be properly dressed for the occasion." Several Navajo women approached, carrying what appeared to be traditional clothing, sized for a white woman. Kate realized this had all been planned in advance. They had known they would be offering her adoption and had come prepared for every aspect of the ceremony. "How did you know I would agree?" Kate asked in amazement. Joseph, now fully dressed in his ceremonial regalia, smiled with the confidence of a man who understood human nature. "Because you are the woman who risked her life to save my children. Such a woman does not turn away from family." As Kate was led away to be prepared for the ceremony, she could hear the approaching hoofbeats of the Redemption Falls vigilantes growing closer. But she also heard something else. The sound of Navajo voices raised in harmony, singing songs that spoke of family, unity, and the sacred bonds that transcend the boundaries between peoples. The transformation of Kate from a simple trader into a Navajo clan mother was about to begin, but it would take place under the eyes of armed white men who had come expecting to find evidence of Indian treachery. Instead, they would witness something unprecedented in the history of the American frontier, a ceremony that proved love could bridge even the deepest cultural divides. When Kate emerged from the preparation tent wearing traditional Navajo women's clothing, she barely recognized herself. The outfit included a velvet blouse in deep turquoise, a long skirt woven with traditional patterns, and jewelry that incorporated both silver and turquoise in designs that told stories she was only beginning to understand. But more than the clothing, it was the way the Navajo women had prepared her that marked her transformation. Her hair had been arranged in traditional style. Her face had been painted with symbols representing protection and new beginnings. Joseph looked at her with an expression that combined pride, gratitude, and something that might have been awe. "Now you look like the mother of my children," he said softly. Little Moon and Desert Rose, dressed in their own ceremonial clothing, seemed to sense the importance of the moment. Both babies were unusually quiet and alert, their dark eyes taking in the pageantry surrounding them with the serious attention children reserve for events they somehow understand to be significant. The drums grew louder as the ceremony officially began. But Kate could also hear another sound growing in the distance, the thundering hoofbeats of the vigilante party from Redemption Falls. The adoption ceremony that would make her a Navajo clan mother was about to take place under the eyes of men who had come to destroy everything she had built. The final test of whether love could truly triumph over fear was about to begin. The ceremonial drums reached a crescendo just as the vigilante party from Redemption Falls crested the final ridge overlooking Kate's trading post. What the 30 armed men saw below them defied every expectation they had formed during their angry ride across the desert. Instead of the war party they had anticipated, they found themselves looking down at what appeared to be the most elaborate Native American ceremony any of them had ever witnessed. The transformation of the area around Kate's trading post was complete. Colorful banners fluttered in the evening breeze, ceremonial fires cast dancing shadows across painted faces, and the rhythmic beating of drums seemed to make the very earth pulse with life. At the center of it all, a white woman dressed in traditional Navajo clothing stood beside Joseph Crow Feather, holding two native babies, while surrounded by tribal elders who were clearly conducting some kind of sacred ritual. Marcus Reed, the leader of the Vigilante Party and owner of Redemption Falls' largest mining operation, pulled his horse up short as he tried to make sense of the scene below. Reed was a hard man who had built his fortune through ruthless determination and an unwavering belief that Indians represented an obstacle to progress that needed to be permanently removed. He had expected to find evidence of Kate Brennan's treachery. Perhaps stolen goods, weapons being traded to hostiles, or worse. Instead, he found himself witnessing something that challenged every assumption he held about the nature of white-Indian relations. "What in hell is happening down there?" muttered Jim Walsh, Reed's foreman, and the man responsible for organizing the vigilante response to reports of Indian warriors massing near the trading post. Reed studied the ceremony through his field glasses, noting details that increased his confusion rather than clarifying the situation. "Looks like some kind of Indian wedding or adoption ceremony, and that's definitely Kate Brennan in the middle of it, dressed like a squaw." The contempt in Reed's voice was obvious, but several of the men with him seemed more puzzled than angry. They had ridden out expecting to break up an Indian war party, threatening their community. The elaborate celebration below looked like many things, but threatening wasn't one of them. Down at the ceremony site, Joseph Crow Feather was acutely aware of the armed men watching from the ridge above, but he refused to let their presence interrupt the sacred proceedings. The adoption ritual had reached its most crucial phase, the moment when Kate would formally accept the responsibilities of Navajo motherhood and clan membership. Thomas Begay stepped forward, his weathered hands holding a ceremonial staff carved with symbols representing the 4 sacred directions. His voice carried clearly in the desert stillness as he began the formal adoption chant in the ancient language of the Dine people. "Ashki Tuishnalni, At-Eed Hojun," Thomas intoned, using the twins' full ceremonial names. "Today you receive a second mother, one who saved your lives when the storm spirits tested your family's strength. Kate Brennan, who will be known among us as Azza Tonyelini, woman who saves from water, do you accept the sacred responsibility of guiding these children in the ways of both peoples?" Kate felt the weight of history pressing down on her as she realized she was about to become part of something unprecedented. No white woman had ever been formally adopted into the Navajo nation under these circumstances, and her answer would either bridge 2 worlds or create new divisions between them. Looking down at Little Moon and Desert Rose, who seemed to sense the importance of the moment and were unusually quiet and attentive, Kate spoke the words that would change her life forever. "I accept the sacred responsibility of guiding Ashki Tuisnalni and At-Eed Hojun in the ways of both peoples. I promise to honor their Navajo heritage while preparing them to live in the white world. I promise to love them as my own children while remembering they belong to the Dine nation. I promise to bridge the worlds they must walk between." Joseph Crow Feather stepped forward and removed a small leather pouch from around his neck, a medicine bundle that had obviously been prepared specifically for this ceremony. Inside were items of profound spiritual significance: a small piece of turquoise from the sacred mountains, earth from the place where his children were born, and a lock of hair from their deceased mother. "With these sacred items, I bind you to my family and my clan," Joseph said solemnly, placing the medicine bundle around Kate's neck. You are no longer a stranger who helped in time of need. You are Astzar Tonyelini, sister to Joseph Crowfeather, mother to his children, daughter of the Red Rock clan. The power of the moment was overwhelming. Kate felt as though she was being transformed on a cellular level, becoming someone entirely new, while remaining essentially herself. The medicine bundle seemed to pulse with energy against her chest, and the ceremonial name felt right in a way that surprised her. But the sacred moment was interrupted by the sound of horses descending the ridge. Marcus Reed had apparently decided that whatever was happening below required his intervention. He rode down toward the ceremony site with half his men, leaving the others positioned on the ridge as backup. The Navajo warriors immediately moved to defensive positions, but Joseph raised his hand in a gesture that commanded them to hold a fire. This was a sacred ceremony, and he would not allow it to be profaned by violence unless absolutely necessary. Reed rode directly up to the edge of the ceremonial circle, his contempt for native customs obvious in every line of his body. "Kate Brennan, what in the name of God do you think you're doing?" Kate felt a surge of anger at Reed's intrusion into the sacred ceremony, but she forced herself to respond calmly. "Marcus, I'm participating in a traditional adoption ceremony. These are my children now, legally recognized under tribal law." Reed's face flushed red with outrage. "Your children? Those are Indian babies, Kate. You can't just declare yourself their mother because you participated in some heathen ritual." Joseph Crowfeather stepped forward, his ceremonial regalia making him appear larger and more imposing than ever. "Marcus Reed, you interrupt a sacred ceremony of the Diné people. This is not respectful behavior for a guest on our land." Reed laughed harshly. "Your land? This is American territory, Indian, and this woman is an American citizen who has clearly lost her mind." The tension between the two men was electric, but it was Thomas Begay who diffused the situation with the diplomatic skill that had made him one of the most respected negotiators among the southwestern tribes. "Mr. Reed," Thomas said courteously, "perhaps there has been some misunderstanding. This ceremony celebrates the reunion of a father with his children and honors the woman who saved their lives. There is nothing here that threatens your community." Reed gestured angrily at the 200 Navajo warriors who surrounded the ceremony site. "Nothing threatening. You call 200 armed Indians gathering on our doorstep nothing threatening." "I call it a family celebration," Thomas replied with unflappable calm. "These men came to honor Kate Brennan for her kindness to Navajo children. They came in peace, and they will leave in peace." One of Reed's men, a younger miner named Pete Sullivan, spoke up hesitantly. "Mr. Reed, maybe we misunderstood the situation. This doesn't look like any war party I've ever heard of." Reed whirled on Sullivan with fury. "Don't be a fool, Pete. This is exactly what the Indians want us to think. They stage some fake ceremony to make us lower our guard. Then they attack when we're not expecting it." Kate realized that Reed's hatred of Native Americans was so deep that no amount of evidence would convince him that the ceremony was genuine. His worldview required Indians to be either conquered enemies or active threats. The possibility of peaceful coexistence was literally unthinkable to him. "Marcus," Kate said firmly, "I've lived and worked among the Navajo people for 15 years. I know the difference between a war party and a celebration. These people came here to honor a sacred commitment, not to attack anyone." Reed's eyes narrowed as he studied Kate in her traditional clothing. 15 years of trading with savages, and now you've gone completely native. You're no better than a squaw yourself." The insult hung in the air like a challenge. Joseph Crowfeathers hand moved toward the knife at his belt, and several of his warriors shifted restlessly. But before anyone could respond with violence, Desert Rose began crying, not the angry wailing of a distressed baby, but the tired fussing of a child who had been kept awake past her normal bedtime. The sound of the crying baby had an unexpected, effect on the tense confrontation. Several of Reed's men, fathers themselves, instinctively softened their expressions as they looked at the tiny girl in Kate's arms. Desert Rose's cries reminded everyone present that at the heart of this complex political and cultural conflict were two innocent children who needed protection, not more violence. Kate began singing softly to Desert Rose, a Navajo lullaby that Thomas Begay had taught her months earlier. Her voice, though she sang in an unfamiliar language, carried the universal tenderness of a mother comforting her child. Little Moon, seeing his sister's distress, reached out from Joseph's arms toward Kate with a soft cooing sound. The simple human interaction between Kate and the twins created a moment of clarity that cut through all the political rhetoric and cultural prejudice. Here was a woman who had risked her life to save children, and those children clearly loved and trusted her completely. Whatever complex motivations might be attributed to the Navajo ceremony, the bond between Kate and the babies was obviously genuine. Jim Walsh, Reed's foreman, was the first to lower his weapon. "Mr. Reed, maybe we should head back to town." This isn't what we thought it was, but Reed was too committed to his worldview to back down. "Walsh, you're as big a fool as the rest of them. Can't you see this is all an act designed to make us sympathetic to the Indians?" Thomas Begay stepped forward with a suggestion that would prove crucial to resolving the standoff. "Mr. Reed, if you have concerns about this ceremony or Miss Brennan's actions, perhaps you would feel more comfortable if we moved the celebration to tribal land. We have no desire to make your community uncomfortable." Reed's eyes lit with triumph, thinking he had won a victory. "That's the first sensible thing any of you has said. Get your war party off American soil and take the squaw with you." But Joseph Crowfeather shook his head firmly. "The ceremony must be completed where it began. Azza-to-Nyilini's adoption into our clan must take place at the site where she saved my children. This is sacred law." The deadlock seemed complete, until Kate herself provided the solution that would satisfy both native tradition and white concerns. "What if we completed the ceremony with representatives from Redemption Falls as witnesses? If members of both communities observed the adoption, it would demonstrate that this is a legal proceeding, not a secret conspiracy." Reed started to object, but Pete Sullivan spoke up again. "Mr. Reed, that actually sounds reasonable. If we stayed to watch the ceremony, we'd know exactly what was happening. No secrets, no surprises." Thomas Begay nodded approvingly. "Witnesses from both peoples would honor the sacred nature of this adoption. It would show that Azza-to-Nyilini belongs to both worlds." Joseph considered this proposal carefully. Allowing white witnesses to observe the most sacred aspects of Navajo ceremony was unprecedented and potentially controversial within his own community. But he also recognized the symbolic power of having both peoples witness Kate's adoption. "If the white men wish to witness the completion of the ceremony, they may do so," Joseph announced, "but they must show proper respect for our sacred traditions. No weapons in the ceremonial circle, no interruption of the ritual proceedings." Reed was trapped by the reasonableness of the proposal. Refusing to witness the ceremony would make him appear afraid or unreasonable. Accepting would require him to acknowledge the legitimacy of Navajo law and custom. "Fine," Reed said grudgingly. "We'll watch your heathen ritual, but any sign of treachery, and we'll respond with force." As the sun set behind the distant mesas, painting the desert sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, the adoption ceremony entered its final phase. Kate found herself at the center of a circle that included 200 Navajo warriors, 30 armed white men, and 2 babies who had become the bridge between worlds that had been at war for generations. Thomas Begay raised the ceremonial staff, one final time, and spoke the words that would complete Kate's transformation from white trader to Navajo clan mother. By the power of the sacred mountains, by the blessing of the four directions, by the witness of both peoples, Kate Brennan is no more. In her place stands Asza-Tonyilini, mother of Ashki, Twij, Nalni and Ated Hojun, sister to Joseph Crow Feather, daughter of the Red Rock clan. The ceremony concluded with gift exchanges that demonstrated the wealth and generosity of the Navajo participants. Kate received blankets woven by master craftswomen, jewelry that represented months of skilled silversmithing, and horses that marked her new status as a person of importance within the tribe. But the most meaningful gift came from Joseph himself, a photograph of his deceased wife, holding the twins as newborns. "Marie would have loved you," he said simply as he placed the precious image in Kate's hands. "She would have been proud to share her children with a woman of such courage." As the ceremony concluded and the various groups began to disperse, something unprecedented had occurred. White and Navajo witnesses had participated together in a sacred ritual that created legal and spiritual bonds transcending cultural boundaries. The adoption that began with Kate's simple act of compassion during a dust storm had become a historic moment that proved cooperation between peoples was possible. Marcus Reed rode away from the ceremony still angry and unconvinced, but several of his men lingered to speak with Navajo warriors about trade opportunities and shared concerns about drought and economic hardship. Pete Sullivan shook hands with Thomas Begay and invited him to visit Redemption Falls as an honored guest. Joseph Crow Feather prepared to depart with his honor guard, but not before making arrangements for regular visits that would allow the twins to grow up with connections to both their adoptive and birth families. The sacred bundle around Kate's neck would serve as proof of her status within the tribe, ensuring she and the children would always have the protection of the Navajo nation. As the last of the horses disappeared into the desert darkness, Kate stood outside her trading post, holding Little Moon and Desert Rose, marveling at how completely her life had changed. She was no longer just Catherine Brennan, isolated trader. She was Asza-Tonyilini, bridge between worlds, mother to children who would grow up belonging to both peoples. The dust storm that had brought the twins to her doorstep had indeed delivered more than she ever could have imagined. It had brought her a family, a purpose, and a place in history as the woman who proved that love could transcend every barrier human beings had constructed between themselves. The sacred bond forged that night would endure for generations, creating a legacy of understanding between peoples who had thought they could never be anything but enemies. And it all began with a woman who chose to risk her own life to save two babies during a storm. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.